Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started, and we're going to learn through the most of the chapter in Mishnah Pesachim, the last chapter, the 10th chapter of the Masechet. And we're going to do that because really this time of year I'd like to go back to the incredible gratitude and appreciation for Chazal in essentially saving Pesach. And I say that because we've talked a little bit. I did that with Purim. I do it with Hanukkah, meaning that awareness of the placement of each holiday in the cycle of the year of holidays, and that Purim was really a challenge. We saw that when I taught, I think it was 2 weeks ago, the idea that they continue to debate throughout the Masechet, whether it's Mitamei Yadayim or not. They continue to ask where the audacity of Mordechai came from and how Chazal allowed a holiday that essentially was Yesh Me'ayin to be incorporated with so many mitzvot, right? Essentially lahosif on Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. We saw the Yerushalmi that said they didn't know what to do ad shehi ira Kadosh Baruch Hu et eineihem. With Pesach, we have a different challenge. Pesach really it's a biblical holiday. It's rooted in the Torah. It appears over and over. It is the first mitzvah we are given. When God tells Moshe, that the Bnei Yisrael should take a seh on the 10th of the month and begin the preparation towards that first Pesach, it remains consistently central throughout all of Tanakh. It appears over and over. It appears in Shmot and Vayikra and Bamidbar in Devarim. It appears in Yoshua. It appears in Malachim. It appears in Yecheskel. It is a central holiday to commemorate our birth as a nation. The challenge is that the centrality rests on the Korban Pesach, which we're no longer bringing by the time the editors of the Mishnah sit down to redact the Mishnah, by the time Chazal begin thinking about the holiday. And the question of how do you commemorate or celebrate a holiday whose centrality no longer exists is the challenge. And it's not a small challenge. Now, I'll also say, and this is something if we had time and we could open up the Psukim, we could see, there are actually two adjacent holidays that we essentially combine into one holiday. If you ask children in Gan, what are the names of Pesach? You get Chag HaCherut and Chag HaAviv, which are nice, right? They're about the significance and the time of the year. But then you get Chag HaPesach and Chag HaMatzot. In fact, Chag HaMatzot is a completely different holiday. It begins the morning of the 15th. Chag HaPesach is only the night of the 15th. And you have to finish the Korban Pesach and make sure nothing is left by morning. Everything that's left has to be burned. And you see this really clearly in Malachim, where they have the Pesach, and then for 7 days they have Chag HaMatzot. It's a different holiday. Chag HaMatzot is about not eating chametz. And so what are you going to eat? If you're going to eat bread, you're going to eat matzah. And it really ties much more into the agricultural holiday and the agricultural time of the year, the idea of the wheat and the grain. And we're going to move towards the bringing of the Omer. Right? It's all going to tie together to Chag HaAviv, essentially. But Chag HaPesach, first and foremost, is about the Korban Pesach, which symbolizes God taking us out of Egypt. And so the challenge of Chazal is enormous. How are you? We really could just say, look, guys, there's not going to be a Pesach until there's a Beit HaMikdash. Let's all sit on the floor maybe and have a mini little Tisha B'Av. And then in the morning get up and celebrate Chag HaMatzot, because that's part of the cycle of the regalim. But we're not going to do that. And what makes it even more challenging is essentially that if you open the New Testament, Jesus becomes the Paschal Lamb. Right? It's in Corinthians, it's in John. Jesus is the Paschal Lamb. Jesus has been sacrificed in a crucifixion with a spit, essentially. Right? They're aware of the power of the metaphor. And what they say is Jesus is now the Korban Pesach. And he redeems all of us. So the Christians take for themselves the powerful symbol of Korban Pesach as a sign that they now have been redeemed through that sacrifice. We can't allow that to become the final word on Pesach. And so what we're going to see in chapter 10, and really like in Yoma, the last chapter is the one that's most actually directly relevant for us. right? You plod through all of Yoma to get to the 8th chapter, where finally you see something that's like, oh, we do that. Pesachim is a very long Masechet, much longer than Yoma. You see pieces of what we do. You have B'dikat Chametz right in the beginning, and then a little bit about matzah and how you make matzah and what is matzah. But really the centrality of the evening begins to be fleshed out in chapter 10. And this is where we see the birth of what we call the Passover Seder. Really the idea of the Seder is that we're about to go on a journey, and the order of the unfolding of the rituals is going to be very important on that evening. And what Chazal essentially do in their boldness and in their innovation is to borrow heavily from the Greeks. They look around and they say there's something called a symposium. The symposium has a structure and a framework that will align very well with what we are trying to do on this evening. And so we're going to borrow the framework and the structure. We're, of course, going to rabbinize it. We're going to turn it into something that is a vehicle for our theology, for our relationship with past, present, and future, our sense of chosenness by God on this evening. And we're going to launch it, and we're going to try to convince everyone or promise everyone that really this is okay. This is not, this completely syncs with our religious ideology and philosophy and theology, nothing to be afraid of. And chapter 10 is really a masterful presentation. We're going to pay attention. As I said, unfortunately, I took out a few Mishnahs because we don't have time to do everything. But it's really a masterful presentation of the familiar and the unfamiliar, and that weaving together of that kind of messaging. That some of what we're doing is what we do on Shabbos. It's okay. Just like Shabbos, it's Kodesh. But some of it is going to be so boldly innovative that by the end we're going to realize that essentially they have launched what 2,000 years later is the most practiced evening of the year, the most practiced Jewish celebrated event, more than Yom Kippur, is Leil HaSeder. Leil HaSeder, even today. Among secular Jews, among Reform Jews. Again, people do it the way they do it, and they get the Haggadah they take, but we're going to talk about the birth of the Haggadah a little bit. The Haggadah is not born in 220 CE. It's going to take hundreds of years until it coalesces into the text that we all use. People are sometimes surprised by that, but we really shouldn't be. It's a little like the Siddur, right? It's going to take a couple of hundred years till the texts are chosen. Really, in the Middle Ages only are we going to have the songs of Nirtza added. The Kosh Shel Eliyahu is 1400s, right? Basically, from 220 CE until about 1400 CE, that's the period of time that it's going to take for the Haggadah to appear in the format we're familiar with it. But the first Haggadah that we have really is from the Gaonic period. I think there's you can access. They sell a Haggadah with the earliest manuscripts of that Haggadah and the Rambam's Haggadah and so on. So the idea of a uniform text, a script, if you will, that we're all going to use, the seeds of that idea are very, very clearly planted in this chapter. So we're going to get started. I have put the Hebrew and the English. I understand that, I think it's important to have both languages so people can, and I see Michael did the same thing, so, okay. Harvei Pesachim. So we have an opening Mishnah that ties very well, actually, with something we talked about 2 weeks ago. Harvei Pesachim samuch lemincha lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. So the opening line, for those who have studied Masechet Shabbat, who have studied Masechet Brachot, you know that this is an utterly familiar statement. Because I could swap out Erev Pesachim, and I could put in Erev Shabbat, I could put in Erev Yom Tov. It's going to appear throughout Seder Moed that on the Erev of a holy day, you stop eating Samuch Lemincha. And there you have debate, Mincha Ketana, Mincha Gedola. Again, if you learn Gemara, you know you're constantly threading in ideas that have been developed in other tractates. But we open up a chapter that is going to be boldly innovative, in my opinion, and not just mine, deliberately, with a law that is utterly familiar. And the message that the editor is giving is that it's okay. What we're about to do on one hand is going to be bold and innovative, but the framework of it is going to be like every other Erev. Erev Shabbos, Erev Chag. And the first sugya, Masechet Pesachim, is actually a contrast between Erev Shabbat and Erev Pesach. And they come up with, well, on Erev Pesach, you should stop eating a half an hour before you should stop eating on Erev Shabbos, so you have more appetite for matzah. And they bring in that whole idea of pores mapa, that ties to, I think we mentioned it 2 weeks ago. The idea is that you do want to go into Shabbat or Chag, and you've started a meal, you have a Sheva Brachot at 11 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, and the revelry continues, and it's getting close to Shabbat. We follow a blended shita of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda that you don't have to stop. You can be pores mapa, which essentially means you can cover the breads on the table, and then you make kiddush, and then you welcome in the Shema. You don't have to wash again, and so on. So pores mapa appears in Masechet Pesachim, not about Pesach at all, about Shabbos, but generically it's reminding us that Erev Pesach is exactly like Erev Shabbos and Erev Yom Tov. Again, maybe a little bit of a half an hour difference, but really we're getting ready for a holy day. And the way we get ready is the same way we get ready for all holy days. We stop eating samuch lamincha. Not a great idea if you're not eating and the magid's going to go on for 2 or 3 hours. I would say, I think we all know that many people need to eat before the Seder because the Mishnah would have been, in my opinion, appalled at what many families do, which is not eat till 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Through the Rambam, we have documentation. People are eating, they're dipping, they have little bits of meat and in some cases rice and vegetables. And there's a dipping course that you're sitting and eating for the whole first part of the Seder. That changed, different customs, different practices, and so on. Okay.
Restaurants do that right away.
Yeah, tapas. It's a tapas or a poo-poo platter, Shmulka Bernstein, right? Poo-poo platter. I can say that here. Some people have got to remember Shmulka. What?
It's all Gemara when you go.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. The second line. Va'afilo ani shebi Yisrael lo yochal ad sheyasev v'lo yifchatu lo me'arba kosot shel yayin va'afilo min hatamchoi. Now here too, I have something familiar and something utterly unfamiliar. The ani is very familiar. The idea that I have to take care of the ani from the tamchoi. Tamchoi is the soup kitchen, the soup plate, the charity plate, but really it's food. The kupa is money. Every community has to have a tamchoi or a kupa. A Talmid Chacham should not live in a community that does not have 10 institutional structures. One of them, by the way, is a bathhouse. Another is a latrine. Right? We have to make sure hygiene is cared for. You have to have someone who teaches small children, a slaughterer, a circumciser, and you have to have a kupa and a tamchoi. That is a hallmark of Jewish community. It always has been. It always will be. And in fact, Beit HaTamchoi remains in modern Hebrew. Right? It's much more used in like the Bnei Brak Mea Sha'arim world. But the Beit HaTamchoi is the soup kitchen, or sometimes you'll be sent leaflets, or today it will be SMSs and so on, from a Beit HaTamchoi, that they're collecting food for the Chag for poor people. In the Warsaw Ghetto, there were 3 Tamchois. 3. We're talking about a time of incredible deprivation, starvation, and so on. We organize and create Tamchois. That is what we do. So when I read this Mishnah, again, I say, oh, we're taking care of the ani through the tamchoi. Utterly familiar. That's what we do in Erev Shabbos. Erev Chag, the ani goes to the tamchoi. He can go every day, but Erev Shabbos, he gets a little more. Now we're about to find out 2 new pieces of information. Because, of course, I didn't have to put the ani there. It could have been every person, every man, woman, and every man and woman. I should say child, but not. Children don't have to drink the wine. Men and women, it's going to appear in the Gemara. If we get to it, fine. Everyone has to drink 4 cups. So again, my putting the ani there is to teach something I'm about to need to understand about this night. The ani gets 2 things that the ani never gets throughout the year. He is required to recline. And again, I could have said, V'kol ish v'isha, have to recline, have to drink 4 cups of wine. Instead, I say the ani. Again, what is my message? What? Even the ani, afilu ani, right. And so my message is, obviously, everyone else is reclining, but even the ani. And the second thing is the 4 cups of wine. That is unique, and now I'm going to develop that a little bit more. The reclining is clearly taken from the symposium. Okay? In the symposium, which was directed at wealthy, intellectual people reclined. Chazal knew about reclining. We all knew about reclining. Poor people do not recline. My guess is middle class people didn't really recline either. You had to have the sofas, you had to have like the time to like recline, right, while you're eating. And so that was really something wealthy people did. Chazal already give a message. We are all going to recline, even the poor, who we never even consider conceptually. They don't even know what does that mean to recline. They're going to be having an experience we are all going to be having. This chapter says we are all equal. On this night, man, woman, child are all going to be equal in terms of the seder of what we're going through. Even the ani is going to recline, because the ani, on the face of it, would never recline. And we're saying you have to be part of this as well. Yetziat Mitzrayim, we all went out of Egypt. Number 2, 4 cups of wine. 3 cups of wine would have been utterly familiar to middle to upper class people on Shabbos or Chag. Why? First cup? Kiddush. You always have Kiddush. Last cup? Third cup? Birkat Hamazon. During the meal, people drank wine. Right? Wine was very, again, unless you're ani, you're drinking wine, a little like in France, right? Wine. People didn't drink water. What?
Rambam said, don't drink water, drink wine.
Drink wine, yeah. Water apparently was not so great. But what?
Water wasn't boiled.
Water wasn't boiled. Wine, right? Rambam has a whole chapter on how much wine you have to drink and how important wine is. I just learned that with a student.
Also
good for digestive. Good for digestion.
Like water.
Yeah, water wouldn't have been good. So 3 cups of wine, we know in the rabbinic world, in the early rabbinic period, would have been familiar on Shabbat and Chag. 4 cups is an anomaly. We're going to talk about the 4th cup. We're not there yet. But already I'm curious. Why a 4th cup? What role is the 4th cup going to have? Secondly, and we're about to see this in the Tosefta. Open up it's page, I hope there are pages. Yes, page 2. Turn to page 2 quickly. So page 2 presents that Erev Pesachim, again, the Tosefta often repeats material in the Mishnah, but it always adds material that is not in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda left out. The Tosefta is actually 4 times as long as the Mishnah. It's a very, very big large amount of material. And what gets added here, if we skip the first 2.5 lines, in which 3 lines that are more or less taken in sync with the Mishnah, Arba kosot shel yayin sheyesh behem kedei revi'it. Okay, a revi'it of a lug, 1.5 eggs. If anyone has opened an egg, and I'm guessing some of us have, and we put it in a cup and we look whether there's a blood spot in it, we know that an egg is actually not that much liquid. It takes up a little bit of a cup, right? Like 1/4 of a cup, right? So 1.5 eggs is actually not a lot of liquid. The messaging here is, and by the way, this would not be unique to Pesach, but it's a reminder that the shiur is actually a very small shiur. And that's both for the ani, who's getting 4 cups from the tamkoi. Remember, who's paying for the tamkoi? The community. We do not normally give the ani wine during the year. I didn't mention that. He doesn't get wine Erev Shabbos. He gets flour and oil. What can he make? He can make some pita. He can make some pita, some challah. He's going to make kiddush on bread, on pita most likely, on something very plain. He gets a little legumes. He gets some vegetables. He gets a little fish for Shabbos. During the week, no fish. Right? We have to always think about communal resources, guys. Like, you always have to think, how much can you give the ani? Now, a wealthier community can obviously expand the basket of food that they provide, but minimally, the ani does not get wine. On Erev Pesach, the ani gets wine. That's the anomaly. We now find out you actually don't need that much wine. 4 cups of wine, 1.5 eggs worth each cup, you need 6 eggs worth. It's not a lot of wine. The point of this evening is not drunken revelry. So here we have both a usage of wine, right, familiar. We have 4 cups, unfamiliar. And the message is, you're not really supposed to get drunk, because the amount of wine to fulfill your obligation is actually not that large. This is in contrast to Purim, Chayav Inish L'Psume Ad Shelo Yada Ben Haman Mordechai, right? That's not what's happening here. And it's important to state this, and Rabbi Yehuda then says, you can dilute it down so that it only has the appearance and taste of wine. That's a lot of dilution. If you think about a very nice, very dark red cup of Cabernet, and you begin to add water, you could do this experiment if you have a cheap cup of half cup of Cabernet. You can try it. How much water do you have to add until it no longer has a red tinge? A lot, right? Because the color is very dense. And so Rabbi Yehuda again is reminding us, not only is it a small amount, you can actually dilute it. And so the amount of wine, because you can stretch it, the amount of wine becomes less. The message here is this is not about real drinking. The drinking is holding a symbolic place at this table. We have Kiddush, we have the meal, we have Birkat Hamazon, we have the fourth cup. Right, we're going to get to that. And that's going to be the placeholders in the meal. This is not the symposium. So we're going to use wine. The symposium also uses wine. We use wine. But we're going to be doing it in a very intentional way. 4 cups is a lot of wine. I said to my students yesterday, we thank God, Baruch Hashem, we live at a time of plenty. It's hard for the fact that we have milchiks, fleishiks, and parv. And then for Pesach, many people have milchiks, fleishiks, and parv. You cannot understand how the Shulchan Aruch is so lenient about koshering, the whole thing about glass, until you understand that people had small homes, they did not have a lot of means, and that, again, we live in a time of plenty. Materials are cheap. We can go to a Mac stock and buy a whole set of dishes for under 100 shekel, is my guess. It's insane, right? The same thing with wine. Every tamchoy is going to be giving the ani bottles of wine, right? For Erev Shabbos also. We live at a time where food costs are, we complain, I know, it's true, light rate goes up. But when you think about even 100 or 200 years ago, the amount of work that went into making clothing, pre-industrial revolution for sure, the amount of work that went into making clothing, that went into making objects. You have to understand, we do the shear, oh my God, everyone has a cup like this, and we fill it, and then we drink World Coast. But if you didn't have the kind of money to be able to afford, or the ability to drink that, to afford that, the amounts can really be crippling. And so I think that the wisdom here of this night is not about showing off how great your wine selection is. Today it is. I get that. Today we really live at a time. I have a student in New York who is a wine seller, and he sells very beautiful, delicious wines. And Hiddur Chag, Hiddur Mitzvah, wonderful. But the message here is it's not really about the quality of the wine. In fact, the Tosefta says raw or diluted, fresh or old. It could be a very cheap wine. It could be a very fresh wine, which is not very tasty. It's not about enjoying the wine tonight. The wine has a role to play in the script. It's a prop in this evening. That's what the wine is doing. Okay, let's go back to the Mishnah. So we've learned that Erev Pesach Samuch L'Mincha we don't eat. We've learned that the ani goes to the tamchui. We've learned that the ani, which means everybody is going to recline. Everyone is going to have 4 cups of wine. That's what we've learned. Next. Mazgulo Kos Rishon. So now we get to the first kos. We know it's about Kiddush. Beit Shammai Omrim Mevarech al Hayom v'achar kach Mevarech al Hayayin. Beit Hillel Omrim Mevarech al Hayayin v'achar kach Mevarech al Hayom. This is a debate that appears again between Beit Hillel and Shammai, Masechet Brachot, Masechet Shabbat. It's appearing here. It appears in other places. It's a classic debate. Beit Shammai comes along and says, what do you make for? You have 2 options. You're making the bracha on Shabbat, the Kadesh Shabbat, and you're making Borei Pri Hagafen. Beit Shammai says you need to make Kiddush on the wine, you make the bracha on Shabbat, because that's what's Mikadesh. And then you make it on the wine. By the way, I totally understand Beit Shammai. It makes a lot of sense. He says, first you welcome the Shabbat, which gives sanctity to the wine, and then you make the bracha on the wine. And Beit Hillel comes in, and what does he apply, guys?
Tadir.
Tadir v'she'eino tadir. There's a principle in the Gemara that what is most common, what's familiar, you make brachas on wine all the time, tadir v'she'eino tadir. Shabbos is only once a week, Pesach's once a year. So you're going to start with the wine because that's tadir. So that also makes some sense. We can find meaning at that as well. You make the bracha on the wine, and then you bring in the kedusha of the Shabbat. Then the wine is sanctified through the bracha. The wine has now been blessed, and then you make the mekadesh Shabbat. So this is a classic debate. Did they have to bring it here? They didn't have to bring it here. We already know this debate. But what I'm reminding everyone is that Kiddush is Kiddush. Erev Shabbos, Erev Chag, Erev Pesachim. It's the same Kiddush. Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel have the same debate about Erev Pesach that they have about all of the other Chagim. Now we go to the completely unfamiliar. And now we borrow heavily from the symposium. Hevil lefanav mitabel b'chazeret. So now we get the idea of a dipping, right? That you dip with the chazeret. The chazeret will be used for maror as well. And you're going to begin dipping with it or it's going to have two placeholders. It's going to be props in two different ways on this evening. Probably talking about an endive like lettuce, because you can scoop up, right? Think about an endive, how easy it is to scoop, hummus, trina, etc. So mitabel b'chazeret, ad shemagia the parperet hapat. And the Rambam talks about this in his Haggadah as well, and the Gaonik Haggadah. You had a dipping course, and the dipping course had lots of little plates of chopped up food, and you would make a bracha rishona and a bracha achrona potentially, right? So again, we don't do that. We do karpas. Karpas does appear in the Gemara, but not in the Mishnah. So mitabel b'chazeret, ad shemagia the parperet hapat. The parperet hapat is a Roman course. The Romans had two courses. They had the dipping course, they had the main course, and the parperet hapat is the bread course. We're not going to have bread. What are we going to have? We're going to have matzah. Okay, right? So we're going to be using a framework, the dipping and then the bread. It gives structure and gravitas and a kind of direction to the meal. And so then we get the charos. Hiviu lefanav matzah v'chazeret v'charoset. We know the matzah and the chazeret are normally eaten with the korban pesach. There's no korban pesach. The question is, what is the role of the charoset? That's a whole other share. Where did charoset come from? We don't know exactly. Vishnei tavshilim. What I love about the shnei tavshilim, anyone remember what the two examples are? It's not meat. You think the shnei tavshilim are for the korbans, but beets and rice. Beets and rice. Beets are really cheap, right? Rice is really cheap, right? So substitute quinoa if you want. But the point is, the shnei tavshilim, the examples the Gemara gives are not meat examples. You don't, we're going to see in the Manashtana people did eat meat, of course. But if we think about, very interesting to me that they use non-meat examples. I wonder if the ani is in the background there. Maybe the ani can afford a little meat, but he certainly can't afford a lot. Afal pi she'en charoset mitzvah, Rabbi Eliezer bar Tzadok omer mitzvah. Question of charoset is a debate. Is it a mitzvah or not? I know we talk about the mortar and the bricks, and that's very cute, and it gives nice meaning in Gan. But the Gemara actually brings two examples. The examples that it suggests are, why the charoset? The charoset, they say, kills the worm in the lettuce, right? So, yeah, they talk about the worm in the lettuce, and in the chazeret, or dulls the bit. They don't even talk about the bitterness. It's a very bizarre language. And the second thing is under the apple tree, mitachat tapuach, the idea that we remember God's love for Bnei Yisrael through the metaphor of the apple, which appears in Shir HaShirim. Again, variant later, we'll get to the mortar and the bricks, and it's paste-like and it's mortar-like, but charoset kind of appears out of nowhere, right? Why did charoset appear? Mitzvah. Now, the last thing I want to point out in this Mishnah, and it's a very important point, uv'mikdash mivi'in lefanav gufo shel Pesach. Now, what I love about the language in the manuscripts, if you would now go to a print Mishnah, you're going to say, wait, Nechama, it says hayu mivi'in in the past. At some point, some scribe or some printer decided that why was it in the present, right? It suggests that there's a korban pesach. By the time the Mishnah is being written down, no korban pesach. But I think they utterly misunderstand what the Mishnah is trying to do.
Preparing for the future.
I won't even go there. I would say I don't think that, actually, although that could be in the background. You're always preparing for Mashiach, right? But I think what they're actually messaging is that Miviim lefanav here in this time continuum, which we're not in, and guess what? We're sitting here with the matzah and the chazeret, and we're okay. Miviim lefanav, right? The Kohanim are bringing out the korban pesach, and we're bringing out the matzah and the chazeret and the charoset, and it's all the same. It's all in the same time continuum. Okay, we don't have the korban pesach, but virtually we do. But what we really have is the matzah, chazeret, charoset, and this aligns with a line in the Tosefta, which I didn't bring, in chapter 2, 22. Chazeret v'hamatzah v'hapesach ein ma'akvin ze et ze. Very important line. Basically, the Tosefta goes even a little further. It says, if you have one, that's okay, right? You have matzah, chazeret, and pesach, and essentially they're all independent of their other. They don't prevent the other from being brought. So I'm bringing this Mishnah together with a statement in the Tosefta, and what I'm basically being told is, without the Korban Pesach, we're going to be okay. We've got matzah, and we have chazeret, and over here somewhere they have Pesach, and we don't, and we're okay. Rabban Gamliel is going to go even further, and it's okay. Because we have each mitzvah is independent. The matzah is a mitzvah, and the chazeret is a mitzvah, and we're okay. Maybe even the charoset. Right? Maybe we can get a third mitzvah according to Rabbi Tzadok, that there's a Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok. Okay, let's go on to Mishnah Dalet. Mazgulo kosheni, let me be attentive to time. Mazgulo kosheni, v'kan haben shoel aviv, v'im ein dat b'ben aviv melamdo. So the question answer format is also very much from the symposium. Of course, it's also from the Torah, right? The question answer format would have been more the student philosopher, right? Philosopher student model, that's how you learn. We know that as well. But we have ki yishalcha bimcha lemachar, right? This idea of when your son asks you tomorrow. In Shemot it appears 3 times, and in Devarim it appears once. That's where we get the 4 sons, the midrash about the 4 sons. But already you pour the second cup, and now you begin to have a little bit of a script, right? Until now, it's been very experiential. We have the kiddush, and we have the dipping course, and we're going to have the bread course, but the question is, at what point do you do what we're about to? It's not clear, the order, right? Someone's going to come in and say, we need a clearer order here. And you pour the second cup, and clearly it's before you eat the meal, because you'd be eating it with the meal. And then you invite the son to ask questions. And if the son can't on his own ask questions, his father will teach him the following questions. The idea is that children should come up with their own questions. All sorts of crazy things are happening this night. It's very unusual. It's an unusual evening. There's reclining, and there's the wine, and there's the dipping, and there's this and that, and the ani, if we know about the ani. And so the next clause is really for sons who don't know how to ask, or children who don't know how to ask, and we give them a script. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot, shebachol halaylot anu matbilin pam achad, halayla hazeh shtei pamim. That reinforces my point that most people knew about a dipping course. It was part of the Greco-Roman, what? No, the first one is, no, I didn't skip. The order of the Mishnah is different than the order in our Haggadahs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't skip. This is the order of the Mishnah.
No, mine is Mishnah has
Yes, because the print Mishnah, this is from the Kaufman manuscript.
Oh.
Okay, thank you. I knew. Mindy here too. Yes, that's great. Mindy is working off of the print Mishnah, which is based on, I would say, the editor trying to align it more. You probably have 4 questions there also, or did they keep the 3?
No, I don't know.
No, because did they keep the 3? 3. They kept 3. Yeah, but the print is going to try to align more with what happens in the Haggadah, even though they leave in the meat, as we're going to see. Okay, so anu matpilim pam achad, in our Haggadah, ein anu matpilim afilu pam achad, because by the time the Haggadah writes down the questions, no one's dipping. But in the time of the Mishnah, what we understand is children would have seen dipping. Even if they didn't dip in their own home, Greco-Romans dipped, like it was a culture. It's like going to, where do they do tapas? In Spain? I think so, in Spain. Right? Children know of tapas. You get people from England, they have no idea what tapas is, right? But children, so you're not going to have a question of, hey, why do we do tapas? You might say, why do we do tapas twice? Right? That would be a question. So the first question is, anu mapilim pamachad alayla zeh shtei pamim. The charoset is being dipped into the chazeret dipped into the charoset. Shebechol halilot anu ochlim chametz umatzah halayla zeh kulo matzah. So we have, what are we reminding everyone? Yeah, we don't have a Korban Pesach. We still have the Chametz Matzah thing, people. Right? Chametz and Matzah, we only do Matzah. Remember, that's what makes this night also unique, regardless of the Korban Pesach. The last question is, Anu ochlim basar tzli shaluk umuvushal halayla zeh kulo tzli. We don't have that question anymore either. It gets removed. What are the 2 questions that are missing? Maror, right? And the second question is about haseva, which again wouldn't be a question for children at that time. Because they knew people, even if they didn't recline in their own home, it's a little bit like, you know what's going on in other people's homes. You know that people recline. So things are going to change, but the scripting and the format, the idea that we need to prepare questions for children to ask is already taken from the Mishnah. The Mishnah plants that seed. Things are going to change. What we don't have is a question about the Korban Pesach. It's true that the custom was to eat roast meat. The child might ask, why are we eating roast meat? But it's not explicit. It's not explicit, right? That might be the answer, right? But it's not an explicit question. Again, that's where we get this idea pedagogically. You have to be where your children are. It's really important. That's what this night is about, passing on the tradition. And so throughout history, there have been different ways of approaching this. And today especially, there's an emphasis on more games. The idea of games, of engagement, of making the Seder fun. we'll talk a little bit about the script of the Haggadah. I had a student the other night in Tel Aviv, a young woman, who said, like, she's at a Seder where most people don't want to read the boring parts of the Haggadah, and she feels she's obligated to. And I said, look, I think, please keep doing what you're doing, but to say there's a chiyuv, that's really interesting, because nowhere does it say there's a chiyuv to read the Haggadah from beginning to end. We've created the chiyuv, and maybe that's what gives it weightiness. But the reality is, it's not Megillat Esther. It's not a text that you have to read from beginning to end. But because it was scripted in the way it was, people feel committed to. I think it's wonderful. How do you get people to buy in? How do you get people to commit? But I don't believe anywhere it says that you're obligated to say every word of the Haggadah. Like, I've never seen that. It's just assumed that's what you have to do. The Maxwell House Haggadah printed all the words of the Haggadah, right? Like, who was Maxwell House going to? It was going to completely unaffiliated Jews for the most part. Right? And they're saying, and then like the guy with the the grandfather is sitting and saying it, and the rest of the people are schmoozing, whatever. The sense that someone has to say it, right? So I said to her, you could be the person to say it, but don't be anxious that other people are not. There's a reason every year hundreds of Haggadahs are sold, like hundreds of new Haggadahs come out, and the array is mind-boggling. Because people are looking for more than the script, but that's how successful it was. Right? I would say it's so successful that everyone wants a Haggadah that gives meaning to their community, to their family.
Expound on it. It's praiseworthy.
And absolutely, it's a mishubach, but that's different than saying mechuyav, right? The word of chiyuv, right? So we can argue, but the question is,
you have to give him some food.
You have to give food, food for thought, yes. And I want to say the entire script is me'arami oved avi ad sheigmor kol parsha kula. It's 4 psukim. Okay, the Mishnah basically says you got to say 4 psukim, and then right lefi da'ato shel ben and so on. Then you melamdo. You create the script, guys. The Haggadah is going to come along and say, well, not everyone can create a script. Not everyone's good at it. Not everyone's learned. Not everyone has the liturgy. We'll create a script for you. We'll pull in midrashim from all over. We'll pull in the midrashim on Pesach, right? We'll have midrashay halacha, and we'll have Haggadah, and so on. It'll be very, very nice. But the Mishnah says the minimum text you need to say, I would say this, they're looking at as required because it speaks to the experience of the evening. It goes like this. It's Perek Kafvav in Dvarim, Psukim Hey to Tet, Va'anita va'amarta lifnei Hashem Elokecha, Arami Oved Avi. Who do you think the Arami Oved Avi is? Lavan. Okay, but that's a midrash. Rashbam, who's much more of a Pashtan, comes in and says it's actually Avraham. And so I'm just saying, right, the Arami Oved Avi, I actually never liked that it was Lavan. I know that's what the midrash says. The midrash that's in the Haggadah. The Rashbam says it's Avraham. Avraham Arami Haya. Me Padan Aram. He says, Oved v'gola me Eretz Aram. He was a wandering, I can't say Jew, he wasn't yet a Jew, but he was a wandering Abrahamite, right? He was a wandering Abraham. He was essentially exiled by God, right? The Rashbam is much more about the Pshat, right? The Midrash comes and does Drash. They like the idea that Lavan came and Kimat Akru et Hakol. That I'm not, right? Here's a new idea to bring at your Pesach Seder. That it's not necessarily Lavan. It bothered me that Lavan made its way into, like, what does Lavan have to do with our exile story? Like, it didn't make any sense. Lavan is not the reason we go down to Egypt. Yaakov runs away from Lavan to where? He goes back to Eretz Yisrael. He goes back to Canaan. What did Lavan have to do? Now, you can see that what the Midrash tries to do is to say Lavan comes in and he tries to destroy, and we're only here because God saved us. It's another redemption story. But historically, right, I'm going to read the rest of the Psukim. Historically, we are going to tell our story in 4 psukim. It's an amazing, amazing thing. It's the text of Bikurim. Arami Oved Avi, V'yered Mitzrayma. So I'm going to read it as Avraham, if you'll allow me, but you can, again, put in whatever you want when you want to. Arami Oved Avi. Basically, it all starts with Avram, who is Oved, right? He essentially is Nigal. He goes off on Lech Lecha. And V'yered Mitzrayma. He actually also goes down to Egypt, by the way. I'm not reading. You don't have this. I'm just telling you where it is. We got very, very numerous. We went down and we lived there. They afflicted us. V'yotzienu Adonai miMitzrayim biyad chazaka v'zro netuya uv'mora gadol uv'otot uv'moftim. That is the story we tell on Leil HaSeder according to the Mishnah. 4 psukim. They're not into let's tell a long story, let's bring Moshe in, let's read large swaths of text from Sefer Shemot. That is not what this night is about. This night is meant to be an engaging experiential night. And by the way, when the Korban Pesach was in practice, no one's sitting around talking. They're eating. Right? We see that over and over. First of all, they're not in their homes. They're Harei Yerushalayim. Right? They had to leave their homes to go, which meant a lot of times women were left at home because they were tamei. It was not a family event. It was a national event. Right? The women were either after childbirth or possibly menstruant. So some women went up. I don't say none, but you know, you're leaving your family behind. You're going up to Pesachim, and the children are small, certainly, and you're going up, and everyone's sitting. So it's a national event. The Mishnah brings it back into the home. It's a family event. We're going back to Pesach Mitzrayim. Pesach Mitzrayim took place in the home. We essentially, in some ways, are closer to that first experience because we're back in the home as opposed to in the place that God chose. Devarim shifts it, right? Devarim is where we're told you have to do the Korban Pesach in the place that God chose. And then the story is...
The first Seder we had was
in the
Egypt, in the home. We all had to consume it by midnight.
Yes, yeah.
So we're repeating that experience.
We're repeating that experience. Again, the brilliance of it. You're back in the home, but you need to tell your story. The pasuk that people notice gets left out, V'yivienu ala makom hazeh. Right? The 5th pasuk. We couldn't go one more pasuk, but the V'yivienu gets left out. Right? V'yivienu ala makom hazeh v'yitin lanu et haaretz hazot eretz zava chalav u'dvash. That's not what this night is about. Okay, for us it is, and we can keep reading, of course, and we can talk about we're in the land of Israel doing this. But for the editors of the Mishnah, that was not, this night was about our birth story. It was about God hearing our oppression and our suffering, and God redeeming us. That's the focus of the evening. That's what we have to keep going back to. That's what the Korban Pesach was about. It was not about bringing us into the land of Israel. It was taking us out because God redeemed us from the slavery and suffering. It was about that specific freedom. And so they're very focused, right? It's an evening that needs to be tightly focused, and it's not an evening to start reading endless psukim in the Torah. That's not what's happening. 4 psukim. Rabbi Gamliel Haya Omer. Rabbi Gamliel now says we have to say 3 things. So here's our second script. That was text 1. Now we're going to get to text 2, and there will be text 3. We're back in the Mishnah. Page 1. I'm still on the first page. And I'm going to run out of time. I really only have till 11:30. Can I be Rabbi Sussman and go a little longer? Okay, I see it. People can do that. Rabbi Gamliel Haya Omer, Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu bepesach, lo yatsa yedei chovato ve'elu hein pesach matzah maror. Now again, brilliant. You just have to say them, guys. It's not clear. Do you have to eat them? Do you not? But as long as you say them with kavana, you pesach matzah maror, you've been yotze yedei chovato. Just saying the word Pesach, the magic word, and you're done. That's it. We don't need a Now notice what?
You have to eat them together.
How are you going to eat them together? There's no Korban Pesach.
What?
Right? There's not Rabban. Okay. I'm with you. I'm not against, right, that I believe strongly that the editors of the Mishnah realized the Galut was going to be long. Right? They couldn't. It doesn't mean right now if you're learning Daf Yomi, you know Sanhedrin's all about Chevlei Mashiach and Yemei Mashiach. Some of it really, like some of you are like, are we watching this unfolding right now? I hear that. But I do think...
If you don't study it, you watch it unfold.
You watch it unfold, yeah. I'm just saying right now we happen to be in that, in the Daf. But Rabbi Gamliel is basically saying you need to say these 3 things. He's talking about a reality in which we don't have the Korban Pesach. We don't know when it's going to be brought. And notice again, there's going to be a weaving into the evening the memory without spending too much time regretting, mourning, etc. You could just say Pesach and then notice what he says you're doing. Pesach al shum shepasach hamakom al batei avotenu b'Mitzrayim. Rabbi Gamliel says, why do you say Pesach? Not because of the Korban Pesach, but because of the meaning that was before the Korban Pesach. In other words, the reason you bring the Korban Pesach is to smear the blood on your lintels and doorstep so that God is Pasach. Right? That's an amazing thing. And he says, that's what we're remembering, not the actual Korban. You don't need the Korban if you remember that God passed over us to save us. Then notice there's going to be a deviation, right? And if you're following, they didn't deviate in the print. I'm back in the Kaufman manuscript. He says Pesach Matzah Maror. And so the print edition says Pesach Matzah Maror. But the manuscript, which is the most accurate presentation, actually switches the maror and the matzah. It doesn't want to end with the maror. Maror al shum shemaru hamitzrim et chayev avotenu b'mitzrayim. And then what's last? Matzah al shum shenigalu avotenu b'mitzrayim. The editor of the Mishnah says, look, I know the order he said it, Pesach Matzah Maror. I get it. For whatever reason, that's what falls off the tongue. Also, Pesach is very central, and then Matzah, and then you put Maror last. But conceptually, do I want to end with Maror? Pesach al shum shepasach, Maror shemiru et chayehem, Matzah shenigalu. Matzah takes us on the journey. Matzah is the symbol of the Geula. And matzah, even in the Haggadah, right, when we finally get, the halach ma'anya becomes lefichach anachnu chayavim. The matzah is going to play a dual role here. It's going to be a sign of the poor man's bread, and ultimately it's the sign of our redemption. And we're sitting in Mitzrayim eating matzah, not because it didn't have time to rise. They've spent 4 days preparing for this evening. Right? The matzah on the 15th is not the matzah we're eating the morning of the 15th. Right? Chag HaMatzot, different holiday, different meaning. There we're going to think about matzah not rising and we had a haste and so on. There maybe we'll think also about agriculture. But the night of the 15th, the matzah is a sign of redemption. And so the editor of the manuscript, the Mishnah, says, you can't put maror and then lefichach anachnu chayavim lahodot. We're not going to be lahodot on maror. We suffered the maror. It's what God heard and took us out. But matzah al shum shenigalu lefichach anachnu chayavim lahodot la'alel l'shabach lefer. It makes much more sense here. The order. Now, the print edition came along, whoever was editing that, and was like, I don't understand. The order of Rabban Gamliel is Pesach Matzah Maror. So we have to align, right, this is how mistakes get made, we have to align the Pesach Matzah Maror in the order he said it. But originally, the redactor of the Mishnah said, we don't want to end with Maror, right? Matzah al shum shenigalu should be the final word there. Lefichach anachnu chayavim lahodot la'alel l'shabach l'varech la'alel l'kales. And really, this is where we see the emergence into the fourth cup, the idea behind the fourth cup and what is different about this night, Hallel. Right? Ultimately, what is going to turn this night into far more than a symposium is the idea that we are going to praise God. We do not say Hallel on any other night. We now say it on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Okay, but that was obviously relatively new. The only night of the year we say Hallel is Chag HaPesach. It is very, very intentional and deliberate. Who's saying Hallel, by the way, in the time of the Mikdash? We see it for the first time in Sefer Melachim. The Leviyim are saying it as the Kohanim are slaughtering. We become the Leviyim. Right? We take that role that was so careful, right? The hierarchy there was very important. You have the Kohen, you have the Levi, and then the rest of us are Yisrael. And on that night, we are all able to become Leviyim and praise God. And while the symposium has songs as well, our songs are directed in a very specific direction. Our songs are Hallelujah. Our songs are Hallel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is redeeming us. And you see the passage, God appears over and over. This is not the Megillah. There's nothing mustar about God's role in this evening and in our lives and in the redemption and chosenness of this people. And so God, the praise to God is essentially going to be the fourth cup. In other words, that's the innovation. That's the bold innovation. That the last stage of this journey has to be hallelujah. Right? So we're not there, right? Mazgudal kosh shlishi, but this is already setting it up. Matzah al shum shenigalu lefichach anachnu chayavim, and we're going to put the hallel at the end of the meal. At the end, we're going to end with hallel. Just as people are going to be finishing their fourth cup, just as the opportunity for drunken revelry could be hovering, we transition into Hallel. That's where we're going to begin, like praising and singing praise. So we have Mazgulo Kosh Lishim Mevarech Al Mizono, Revi'i Gomer Alav Et HaHallel. Right, the fourth cup is Hallel. That's the point of the fourth cup. The Gomer, and so on. And you can drink between the first and the second, and between the second and the third, but you may not drink between the third and the fourth. this time is getting a little dicey, right? The night is getting late. The wine is there. Some people are drinking more than the 1.5 eggs, obviously, and we do not want this turning into a symposium. Okay? And here we get the last. What?
I think less.
Yeah, you drink less. Ein maftirin achar. What?
Early because the kids are 10 years old. They're watching.
They're watching the whole thing. The children. I'm about to get to the kids. You know what? Thank you. Before we get to Ein maftirin, turn to page 3, because we're going to have time to look at the Tosefta, but we're not going to. I'm going to leave you a little source sheet with some questions if you want to do a little learning on your own on Shabbos. Okay, halacha 4. A man, I love this, mitzvah l'adam l'sameach banav uvnei beito baregel. Again, the Tosefta brings a halacha utterly familiar from all the regalim. Nothing new here, right? A man is commanded to make his children and his wife happy. Women with what is appropriate for them. Children, what is appropriate for them. Women, it's going to be with clothing. The Yerushalmi says belts and shoes, right? They seem to know their women. And the children are given nuts and sweet like cracked wheat. Nuts, because you can also play with the nuts before you crack them, right? At my house, we always had the walnuts with the nutcracker. My children don't even know what to do with a nutcracker. Right? But part of it was we would play marbles a little bit beforehand. Like you'd sit on the floor and you'd roll, like, what do I do with an unshelled walnut? Right? Like you bang them together. Children at that time as well played with the nuts and then ate them.
Throw it to your brother.
What?
You throw it to your brother.
Try to hit your brother is what you try to do in the head. Rabbi Lazar, here we get to the children. Rabbi Lazar Omer chotfin matzah letinokot bishvil shalo yishnu. It's amazing. You grab the matzah would have been like temani matzah. I hate to break it to everyone. It's not stripes. It's not the stuff you get from Borough Park. It's not the crackly stuff that breaks. It's the soft matzah that you can grab. And basically, start grabbing, adults. You can imagine the children being like, what is going on? This is crazy. And Rabbi Yehuda even says, you can't even eat from your prepared pot. You can't lit bowl, right, going to the beginning of the meal. Chotfin matzah letinokot bishvil shelo yishnu. It's very important to keep the children awake. There are 2 times a year Rabbi Akiva clapped on his shtender and made all of his students go home, Erev Yom Kippur, to feed the children, and Erev Pesach to engage and entertain the children. The children have to be, this is what's unique about this night as well, the engagement of children as a mitzvah. See, this is a chiyuv. The mitzvah is v'yigadet lebimcha. You have got to get your children engaged and on board because they're the next generation. And if they don't hear this story, if they're not here from beginning to end till we get to Hallel, till they hear us, the point of this evening is not just the drinking of the wine and the dipping and the bread and the point is to get to Hallel. You have to make sure the children get to Hallel. Okay, I want to go back to the Mishnah, and then if we have time, we'll get to one last point. Okay, I think we should have just enough time. Page 2. Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen. I have a great little maybe chiddush for you. The afikomen is not the afikomen that we call afikomen. The afikomen is the dessert course of the Greco-Roman time. The epikoman, it's a Greek word. There is no epikoman, says the Mishnah. None of that. No dessert course, no drunken revelry. It was the point in the symposium where people were utterly drunk, right? The dessert course at that point, and they would kind of burst out of their homes and go to visit other symposiums, right? Like that would be the fun thing to do. And the Mishnah comes and says, Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen. At the point of the meal, and here we remember that where you would eat the Korban Pesach, there's no afikomen. Now, it gets changed. We'll talk about it. You'll see in the Yerushalmi is going to say, wait, what's the afikomen? It's the dessert on page 3. After Ein maftirin achar Pesach afikomen kegon egozin tamarin v'kliot. Professor Yosef Tabori has done a lot of work on the symposium and its alignment with the Seder, and I've read his writings on afikomen. The afikomen was most likely the after party. But it's also known as the Yerushalmi sees it as the dessert course. Regardless, they're aligned. That's it, right? When you finish the parpared pot part of the meal and you have that 3rd and 4th cup of wine, you're done. Ein maftiri. Now, we all have dessert as part of our meal, right? It's not a whole course. But we've turned the afikomen into the name of the matzah inaccurately, which is fine, right? Things take on meaning because that's what we call them. But it's interesting to go back and see the rabbis understand they're using a framework, but they're also very careful not to overuse it, right? The similarities with the symposium, just to finish, use of waiters to bring food, it appears in the Mishnah and in the Tosefta, reclining, dipping, an hors d'oeuvre course where there would have been dipping, the use of wine throughout the evening, being festive, the pedagogic uses of questions and intellectual discussions, and they would have had singing as well. Also games. Games were in the symposium as well for children. We take many of those pieces, we take all of them actually, turn them into this night that has a clear format, a clear direction, a clear script, all of it leading towards Hallelujah. And at the end, we close it down. There is not going to be an afikomen. We cannot, this is not Purim. On Purim, you have after parties. On Purim, you have drunken revelry. That's all part of the Mardi Gras-like atmosphere that we have on Purim that challenges us a little bit to go deeper and find hidden meaning. Pesach, there's nothing hidden about what we're doing here. We're really, really clear. The idea is to get to the Geula. The idea is to get to this experience of Geula. To remember, right, B'chol dor vador, all of us went out of Egypt. That's why the Ani is reclining. We're all reclining. We all have the 4 cups. We are all going through this nationally together, but it is a very personal, familial experience. Everyone in their own home. And the Tosefta even acknowledges you might be alone, right? If we think about Corona Lo Aleinu, right? There were people were alone, page 3. And the Tosefta says, right, that even Chayav Adam, Yud Aleph, here's the Chayav Adam, by the way, La'asok be'hilchot ha'Pesach kol halayla. Now, you don't really have to stay up all night, right? But they're saying, afilu beino leven beno, afilu beino leven atzmo, afilu beino leven talmido. You have to have some isuk with Hilchot HaPesach on this night, not philosophical discussions like in the symposium. This is not Socrates and his students. That is not what we're doing here. You have to be aware, what is the replacement of Korban Pesach? Halacha, Shmirat Mitzvot, telling our story. And so then we have Maaseh Rabban Gamliel V'Zkenim Shayu Mesubim Beit Baitus, right? We have this idea that for the rabbis, they're going to stay up all night talking, right? But going back to my Manishtana, I might only fetch out the Manishtana. That might be all I can do in certain homes. Amei Haaretz, right? There are a lot of Amei Haaretz, a lot of Amcha. They're not staying up all night look where he is, in the house of Baitus, Ben Zonin. Not a very religious, very wealthy Jew, but not necessarily a very religious Jew. But they're all together. It's a wonderful place for them to be spending Leil HaSeder, and they stay up all night until Krot HaGaver. That's only one piece. By the way, it's in the Tosefta, not in the Mishnah. The Mishnah leaves out Hilchot HaPesach. It says, Kol ben chayav adam l'lamdo, right? Like, much more parent-child friendly. The Tosefta ups some of the intellectual challenge with halachot, and like everyone has to afilu beino leven beno, right? Everyone with themselves. The Talmud adds his wife, right? If a son is wise, he asks. If he is not wise, his wife asks, right? So they're the women. The part that I didn't get to, which I don't know what I was thinking, but we have the women there, the women reclining, the women in the 4 cups, right? So we have women, we have children, we have obviously the men, and everyone together experiencing the experience that's meant to essentially reassure us that the Korban Pesach was a stage in our history where there was a symbol, right? That it served as a reminder. But even after we no longer have the Mikdash, we have plenty of ways to connect, engage, and remember. And that's our responsibility. Not to fall into the despair of what is not, but essentially to lean into the possibility of what is and what will be. And that is this night. And may we all have a blessed Leil HaSeder. May you all enjoy the experience of going from step 1 to step 15. And experience some of the Hallelujah. Thank you. What's your name?
Steve Katz.
Yeah, I feel like I've met you before. Yes. Anyway. Yeah. Hi, nice to see you. How are you doing?
Okay.
Good.
She told me to come.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I brought a couple of friends.
Okay, thank you.